people say evolution is not a bad philosophy, but at the same time, it was Hitler's religion during the Third Reich in Germany. Hi, my name is Eric. In this next seminar, Dr. Hovind exposes some of the terrible things that have been done in the name of evolution. Because dictators throughout time have used the evolutionary ideas to support their brutal tactics.
I taught high school science for 15 years, and now for 14 years I've been an evangelist traveling and doing seminars on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. And tonight we're going to share with you some of the dangers of this evolution theory. I don't leave my gorgeous wife and travel every week of the year because I like being gone. Folks, evolution is not just a dumb idea, it's a very dangerous philosophy. I've only got 3 things I want to cover, but it's probably going to take several nights to do that. First of all, I want to tell you what on earth is happening. And secondly, why is the evolution theory dangerous? And what do you do about it? Pretty simple. Okay, what is happening? Tonight as I speak, our president is announcing we're about to go blow up Iraq, I believe, right? The world seems to be coming unglued at the seams. There are wars and rumors of wars every place we look. Why on earth would Joseph Stalin order the execution of 14,700 Polish prisoner of war officers? I thought there was a Geneva Convention. Why do you order the execution of prisoners of war? Why did Hitler order the execution of nearly 6 million Jews, plus others? Why did Pol Pot, the leader of the Cambodian Khmer Rouge, order the execution of 1/3 to 1/2 of his entire population, his own people? He killed them. Why? Why would somebody do that? Why would the Australian Aborigines be rounded up like cows and shot so their heads could be put in museums years ago? Why would somebody do that? Why did Kip Kinkle murder his parents, 2 other classmates, and shoot 26 other ones? Why would a student do that? Kip said, if there was a God, he wouldn't let me feel the way I do. There is no God, only hate. On May 21st, 1998, 15-year-old Kip Kinkle, a student at Thurston High School, that's in Oregon, near Eugene, allegedly entered the school cafeteria and fired more than 50 rounds from a semi-automatic rifle. 26 students were injured, 2 killed. Later, the bodies of his parents were found in his home. He was then arrested and taken to a police headquarters where he attempted to murder a detective during his questioning. Kip said, if there was a God, he wouldn't let me feel the way I do. There's no God, only hate. Why have we had nearly a 1,000% increase in violent crimes since I was a boy? I remember the days when you did not have to lock your house. We'd go off on vacation for 2 weeks. I never had a key to my house growing up. Never did have a key. I don't know if it even had one. You didn't need one in those days. Why would there be such a horrendous increase in unwed birth rates? And so much of our moral structure is just simply unraveling. What on earth is happening? Dylan and Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold made a videotape prior to the Columbine shootings. On that tape, they said, talking about one of the football players, he doesn't deserve the jaw evolution gave him. Look for his jaw, it won't be on his body. These 2 boys were very strong believers in evolution. They did the shooting on Hitler's birthday on purpose. They shot Isaiah Shoals just simply because he was black. They shot Cassie just because she believed in God. Same thing with Rachel. What happened? Why would somebody do this? What's going on in our thinking? Well, the newspaper article in Columbine High School said, the clothes may give a clue to the thinking of these teenagers. The autopsy said one of the boys' shirts said natural selection on the front. Interesting. Textbooks used in Escambia County, Florida, this textbook, says evolution and natural selection go together. This textbook says natural selection causes evolution. Well, just what is this natural selection? Oh, you see, Adolf Hitler thought he would speed up the process by eliminating the inferiors. Hitler honestly thought he was doing the world a favor. So did Joseph Stalin. So did Pol Pot. Why do people do these things? So what is wrong with our thinking? Right after the Columbine shooting, almost instantaneously, 5 more students from within the Springfield School District were arrested for threatening to murder students. principals, or teachers. In the adjacent school districts, more students were arrested for violent threats, and in one case, an elementary schoolboy shot 5 of his classmates with a BB gun. Could it possibly be that what we're teaching them is causing this behavior? You know, what you believe determines how you behave. If you're raised up in a head-hunting society, and you're taught from the time you're a boy, if you go off to war and shoot somebody, you ought to kill him and cut off his head and eat the brains because you get his spirit. I mean, if you really believe that, guess what you're going to do when you go off to war? Your behavior is determined by your beliefs. What you believe determines how you behave. It's always been that way, and it's no different today. Could it be that this evolution theory is to blame? This textbook says you're an animal and share a common heritage with earthworms. Question: if evolution is true, how are the kids supposed to tell right from wrong? I spoke in a public school in Pennsylvania one time. A kid sat on the second row and he said, "Mr. Hovind, I'm an atheist." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yep, there is no God." I said, "Well, tell me, son, are you sure?" He said, "Yep, I'm sure." I said, "Well, son, do you know everything?" He said, "No." I said, "Do you know maybe half of everything?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay, well, let's just pretend that you know half of everything. Is it possible that God exists in the other half you don't know?" Brand new thought rattled around in his brain for a while and got lost, I believe. I said, "By the way, son, if there's no God, how do you tell right from wrong?" He said, "Oh, that's easy." He said, "I determine what's right and wrong." He said, "I'm the God of my own universe." I said, "I'm glad to hear about that, son, because I'm going to shoot you in 5 minutes." He said, "You can't do that." I said, "Oh, yeah, I can. You see, I'm the God of my own universe." And I decided it's fine for me to shoot you. Question: exactly how do we tell right from wrong? In the first couple of seminar tapes, we talked about a variety of topics like the Big Bang Theory, how it's a big dud. We talked about the Garden of Eden. And we talked about why the earth cannot be billions of years old, and why did the people live to be 900 years old before the big flood came. We talked about dinosaurs, and students are being lied to about dinosaurs. They did not live millions of years ago. And on tape number 4, we talk about a whole bunch of lies in the textbooks. Now here we're going to talk about what's happened in the last 150 years since evolution became a popular theory. What on earth is happening? And what you can do about it. We'll get to that eventually. We're going to review some of what we covered on tape number 4, some of the lies in the textbooks, and then go on into how it carries into some practical steps we can take. What do you do about it? We covered in the last sessions how that James Hutton wrote a book in 1795, and he said the earth is millions of years old. Now during the late 1700s, most folks believed the Bible, and most folks thought the earth was about 6,000 years old, because if you add up the dates in the Bible, you're going to get about 6,000, 4,000 BC, not millions. So James Hutton came along and caused people to doubt the earth was 6,000 years old. Then his book had a very strong influence on a lawyer from Scotland named Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell wrote a book in 1830, and in his book he developed what we call today the geologic column. Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, and maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park, named after the Jurassic layer. This whole thing was made up by Charles Lyell in 1830, and the geologic column does not exist any place in the world except in the textbooks. It's pure imagination. It doesn't exist. But all of evolution theory is based on that dumb geologic column, made up in 1830. This fellow said, I myself have little doubt that in England it was the long-age uniformitarian geology and the theory of evolution that changed us from a Christian to a pagan nation. He's right about that, and England is a pagan nation. And folks, I don't know if America ever was a Christian country or not, but it's not now.
That's right.
We are a pagan nation also. What has happened? Charles Lyell's book had a very strong influence on a young preacher named Charles Darwin. Darwin graduated from Bible college to be a preacher. In 1859, after 22 years of writing, Darwin finally published his book, The Origin of Species. We'll get into more of that later, the real title to the book. Darwin's philosophy was strongly influenced by people like Charles Lyell, people like Thomas Malthus. Malthus had written a book that said, there are more babies born than can possibly survive, so it's best if the weakest die off. That greatly influenced people like Charles Dickens when he wrote the Christmas Carol. Remember the scene in there where Scrooge said, well, if he's going to die, let him die then, and decrease the surplus population. Remember that line in there? I don't think you can understand the Christmas Carol, the history behind that, until you understand how evolution ties in. James Hutton's book made people doubt the earth was 6,000 years old. Along came Charlie Lyell, and people began to doubt the flood. Because instead of the flood making all those layers, they said, oh, maybe each layer is a different age. And then along came Charlie Darwin, and people began to doubt the Creator. And so by the mid-1800s, the Western world, at least, was left in a bad situation. They said, well, if there's no God, who's in charge? Well, it must be us. This led directly to the rise of humanism. Humanism is the teaching that there is no God, so we must be God. We make the rules. We decide what's right and wrong. For the next 50 years, after Darwin's book came out, many isms arose in the world. Marxism, Nazism, communism. These things, communism would have been just a footnote in a history book if it hadn't been for evolution coming along at the right time. We never would have heard of communism, most of us wouldn't, if it hadn't been for Charles Darwin coming along and giving justification to that dumb idea of communism. Hoyle said, I'm haunted by a conviction that the nihilistic philosophy, which so-called educated opinion chose to adopt following the publication of The Origin of Species, committed mankind to a course of automatic self-destruction. A doomsday was then set ticking. I agree, Fred. Once you start believing there's no God and we're in charge, then we're in trouble. Right. There was a Russian atheist astronomer came to America one time, and he spoke at one of the universities, and he said, now folks, either there is a God or there isn't. I thought, boy, this guy's brilliant. But then he said, both possibilities are frightening. I thought, wow, that is brilliant. You see, if there is a God, we better find out who he is and find out what he wants and do what he says. Amen. If there is no God, we're in trouble. Because we're hurtling through space at 66,000 miles an hour and nobody's in charge. Pretty scary thought. Charles Darwin said, often a cold shudder has run through me as I've asked myself whether I may have devoted myself to a fantasy. Well, Charlie, you did devote yourself to a fantasy. If you believe you came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, you need help. You were designed for a purpose. Now, what is it? There are 4 great questions that every single religion in the world tries to answer. Even atheism, which is a religion, you have to believe there is no God. There's no way to know that. The 4 great questions every religion tries to answer. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going when I die? The way you answer these questions depends upon how you view the world. There are basically only 2 ways to look at this world. One view says, you know, there's incredible design. There must be a designer. That's the creationist worldview. Other people look at the world and say, you know, nobody made it. It just made itself. They don't believe God created the heaven and the earth. They think a big bang made this world from nothing. That's called the humanist worldview. It just made itself. The first plank in the Humanist Manifesto in 1933 was the universe is self-created, self-existing, and not created. That's the first thing they have to agree to be a humanist. There's now been Humanist Manifesto 2 in 1973 and Humanist Manifesto 3 in the year 2000. They attempt to declare what they believe. Humanism is a religion. You have to believe there is no God. So why is this theory dangerous? Evolution, I am convinced after studying this now for 30-some years, evolution is absolutely the foundation for communism, Marxism, Nazism, socialism, racism. We'll get into some more of that in a minute. Number one, I think evolution is dangerous because it's bad science based on lies. There is no scientific evidence to back up this evolution theory. We've been offering $250,000 for a long time at our ministry for somebody who could give us some real scientific evidence for evolution. It is funny, brother, to see the people try to turn stuff in. One guy said, I've got proof for evolution. I said, really, what do you have? He said, well, I'm working in the laboratory right now, and we have developed soybean plants that are resistant to frost. I said, man, that's good. That'll really be handy. I said, what did you start with? He said, well, soybean plants. I said, oh, what do you have now? He said, I've got a whole new species. I said, of what? Of soybean plant. I said, I'm sorry, sir. That's not evolution, okay? That's a variety of a soybean plant. And it's interesting, and I'm glad you're able to do that. But that's not evolution. There is no evidence whatsoever that any animal ever produced a different kind of animal. So why would anybody believe such a dumb idea? And how can this be so dangerous? Well, we'll cover some of the isms in just a minute. But evolution is based on lies and bad science. There is no good science to back it up. This textbook says evolution is a fact. Evolution is a fact, not theory. Birds arose from non-birds and humans from non-humans. No person who pretends to any understanding of the natural world can deny these facts any more than she or he can deny that the earth is round, rotates on its axis, and revolves around the sun. Sounds like he's open-minded for a discussion, doesn't it? This is not a fact, folks. Evolution is a mantra. They say this over and over and over, hoping it will become true. That's all it is. They just keep repeating it. Oh, evolution's a fact, it's a fact, it's a fact. Well, you better define what you're talking about with evolution. We do that on videotape number 4, the 6 different meanings of this word evolution. This textbook says evolution has evidence from fossils, from structure, from molecular biology, from development. Any evidence that's used to support evolution has been proven wrong. Now, I've said many times, I'm not trying to get evolution out of the schools. I just want the lies out of the textbooks. We almost got a bill passed in Arkansas a couple of years ago, and I went up to Arkansas and testified before the Senate, before the House Representatives Committee that was looking at this bill, HB 2548, I believe it was. And the bill simply said, Arkansas will not use tax dollars to purchase materials if they contain knowingly fraudulent information. We're not going to buy books that have lies in them. And it gave a few examples, like some of the examples I gave in my seminar. If it says the embryo has gill slits, we're not going to buy it. I stood up and testified for 45 minutes before this committee. After I got done, the ACLU lady, woman I mean, she got up and she said, folks, this is obviously an anti-evolution bill. One of the representatives said, ma'am, evolution is not mentioned in this bill. All this bill says is we're not going to buy books if they have lies in them, and these things are lies, so we're not going to buy that book. How can you say this is an anti-evolution bill? And she said, everything mentioned in this bill is used to support the evolution theory. And the guy said, well, ma'am, is it true that these things mentioned here are false? She said, well, yes, but obviously this is an anti-evolution bill. She knew full well, if you took all the lies out of the textbooks, there would be nothing left to support the evolution theory. I was in a debate one time at University of West Florida, and the professor got up and he said, now, Mr. Hovind, you're claiming all these things are lies, and you're right. All these things have been proven wrong, but, he said, I got a question for you. You told us we got to take all this stuff out of the book. What are you going to replace it with? I said, folks, what he's trying to not say is, we want the kids to believe in evolution. We have to give them some evidence, and all we have are these lies, and you want to take these out of the book, so you better find some more evidence for my theory. I said, sir, if you don't have any evidence for your theory, I'm sorry. Maybe you ought to consider getting a new theory. I could suggest one for you, if you'd like. He did not like. He don't want to hear about it, okay? All they have to support their theory are things that have been proven wrong many, many years ago. Here's some of the lies we covered in the first how many hours of this seminar so far. I'll just review them very, very quickly. The Colorado River was not formed slowly. Well, the Grand Canyon did not slowly form by the Colorado River running through it. Okay? The geologic column does not portray Earth's history. It does not even exist anywhere in the world. Rocks do not date the fossils. The fossils do not date the rocks. It is based on circular reasoning. We cover that on videotape number 4. There are no index fossils. There's no such thing as an index fossil. The layers are not different ages. Petrified trees connecting them all prove the layers all formed at the same time. We cover that on video number 4. Plants and animals are not related to each other. They have the same designer, but not the same uncle and grandpa. Change in species is not the real meaning of the word evolution. That's not really what they mean. There's a whole lot more to that. We covered that on video 4. Natural selection does not cause any evolution. Natural selection selects. It doesn't create a thing. We believe in natural selection. The peppered moth story never happened. It's a lie. Comparative anatomy does not prove common ancestry. We covered that on videotape number 4. Humans never have any gill slits. It's a human at conception. It's not a fish or an amphibian or anything else. And abortion is murder, plain and simple. Okay? The appendix is not vestigial. You do need your appendix. The whale does not have a vestigial pelvis. That is a lie. The human tailbone is not vestigial. If you think it is, I'll pay to have yours removed. Dinosaurs did not live millions of years ago. Man did not evolve from animals or cavemen. The Big Bang is a big dud. It didn't happen. The horse series in your textbooks is a lie, proven wrong 50 years ago. Life cannot evolve from non-living matter like the textbook says. The law does not ban teaching creation science like some people want you to think. It's perfectly fine to teach creation science in the public schools. We'll get into more of that later. Smaller is not simpler. A little paramecium is more complex than a space shuttle. Smaller is not simpler. Smaller is more complex. But birds did not come from dinosaurs. Talk about a dumb idea. The eye did not arise by slow changes over billions of years. The first bird did not hatch from a reptile egg, like Goldschmidt said. The trees of life in the textbooks are pure imagination. They didn't happen, folks. They drew it on paper, and that's as far as it goes. It didn't happen in reality. DNA does not prove evolution, it proves creation, it proves a designer. Fossils do not provide any evidence for evolution. Fossils don't count at all. You find a bone in the dirt, you can't prove that bone had any kids, let alone kids that lived, and certainly not kids that were different than the grandparents. Fossils simply are a dead-end street. They don't count for evolution. The Earth is not billions of years old, and the Earth was never a hot molten mass. The Pangea theory that's taught in your books never existed. They say all the continents used to fit together. I get that all the time. Oh, do you think all the continents used to fit together? Used to touch each other? I said, well, they still are. Just the low places are full of water. I mean, the continents are still connected, you know. What do you mean, did they? Hello? They still are. Animals and plants are designed, not adapted to their environments. There are no simple living organisms. Life did not arise 3.5 billion years ago like the textbook says. The sun did not form before the earth like the textbook says. Scientists have not made life in the laboratory. Snakes do not have vestigial legs. The earth never had an oxygen-free atmosphere like the textbook says. No animal is related to any other kind of animal. DNA is more than just chemicals. It carries information. Mutations do not improve the species. Similar bone structure does not prove a common ancestor. It proves a common designer. Amino acids do not prove relationships. Humans are not related to chimps. Darwin did not prove evolution. Textbooks do not teach kids to think critically. They teach them to not think at all. Arranging animals on paper does not prove a thing. Archaeopteryx is not part reptile. It's 100% bird. Feathers did not evolve from scales. It's not just the religious fundamentalists who disbelieve in evolution. Most folks disbelieve in evolution. Evolution is not a light which illuminates all facts. There is no evidence for the magnetic reversals at the ocean floor. The Constitution does not discuss separation of church and state. Does not discuss that. The Supreme Court did not ban creation. Let's give a little bit of the history of what really happened. In the 1800s, almost all the textbooks were thoroughly packed with information about creation, Christianity, godly teaching. Kids memorized Bible verses. I remember in public school in Illinois growing up, we memorized Bible verses and said prayer every morning. Didn't hurt the kids a bit. Helped them quite a bit. Back then, kids got in trouble for throwing spit wads. Today, it's for bringing guns and shooting people. It's a different world, and some of you older folks know what I'm talking about. It has changed radically. In 1925, Tennessee passed a law that said you cannot teach creation, you cannot teach evolution. It actually banned the teaching of evolution in the public schools. It's called the Butler Act. The ACLU, which is the American Communist Lawyers Union, decided they wanted to test this law. So they ran an ad in the paper, said, we're looking for a teacher willing to claim that he taught evolution so we can have a trial to try to get this law overthrown. A guy named John T. Scopes volunteered. He said, I don't know if I taught evolution or not, but I did sub for a biology class one day, and I think all we had was a study hall, but if you want me to go testify that I taught evolution, I'll do it. So John Scopes went on the trial, lasted 10 days in the hot July, Tennessee summer. After 10 days, John Scopes was found guilty of breaking the law. The law said, you can't teach evolution. He claimed he did, so he's found guilty. He admitted he did. He was fined $100. Case was over. Later, the fine was overturned on a technicality, but the judgment was not overturned. The evolutionists lost the Scopes monkey trial. If you want to read the entire story about what really happened, you can see it right here in this book, The Scopes monkey trial, the world's most famous court trial. And by the way, if there's a movie circulating around your school called Inherit the Wind, you better be real careful about that. That's a dangerous movie. That does everything they can. It twists everything about the trial to make the Christians look dumb. You want to read word for word every word that was spoken there? Here it is right here, the court transcript verbatim. You can get it from Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee. The Dayton courthouse is still there with a big museum where you can go through and see where it actually happened. If you go north of Chattanooga about, I don't know, 70 or 80 miles, you can get to Dayton, Tennessee. Been through there a bunch of times. There's a good a good book expose about the Inherit the Wind movie that circulates around it. Just about every year, this is shown in public schools here in Pensacola, where they try to teach the kids the Christians were dumb and they lost the trial. They changed all sorts of things about that. And you ought to be up in arms over that being shown to your kids. You can sign a statement saying, I don't want my child shown the movie Inherit the Wind. Have it notarized and take it into the school. They won't show your kid. You say it's against my religious convictions to lie to my kids, and that movie's a lie. Okay? But I guarantee it'll be shown this year and next year and the next year. I saw it about 4 times growing up before I realized what a lie it was. You want to get the material from Bryan College, there's their phone number, or from George Serrell, who has an excellent article about the Inherit the Wind, what really happened in the book the real trial compared to the Inherit the Wind movie, which is just baloney. Or you might want to get the book Ride to Glory. You can get it through our ministry. I don't read novels much, but this one is incredible. This guy said, what if the Scopes trial was redone this now, in the 21st century, at a modern university? Whew. But I couldn't put it down. I mean, I read a lot of books, but this one, I never should have started it, man. I couldn't. I didn't sleep for 4 days trying to finish that. I wasn't quite that bad, but in 1968, the last law banning evolution was overturned. Now keep in mind, there were many laws against teaching evolution until 1968. There's never been a law against teaching creation. The laws banned evolution. In 1980, the state of Arkansas passed a law and said, we want balanced treatment. If the teacher teaches evolution, they must also teach creation. Give it balanced treatment. The court in Arkansas, 8th Circuit Court, I believe, struck that down and said, no, this law is unconstitutional. They didn't say you couldn't teach creation. They just said you can't demand equal time. And the atheists started going around saying, see, you can't teach creation. That's not what the law said. It's not what the court said. They never said you can't teach creation. They just said you can't require that the teachers teach creation. If we passed a law in Florida that said the teachers are required to breathe, I bet that law would be struck down. Because, I mean, you probably ought to breathe, but they can't require that you breathe. Right? And that's what happened with the Arkansas law. Then Louisiana passed a law requiring teachers to teach creation if they taught evolution. Again, balanced treatment. Supreme Court struck this one. It went all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court struck it down. After the 1987 ruling by the Supreme Court, Stephen Jay Gould, who hated creationists and had a set of my tapes on his shelf. I went up and visited his office. His secretary was there. She said, yeah, he's got your tapes right here, Mr. Hovind. I never did get to meet him. He died a few years ago. He knows better now. He's no longer an evolutionist. But Stephen Gould said after the verdict, he said, no statute exists in any state to bar instruction in creation science. It could be taught before and it can be taught now. They never said you can't teach creation. The court said you can't require it. That's all. And don't let anybody tell you different. That's what the law, that's where it stands right now. Michael Zimmerman said, and he's an evolutionist, he said the Supreme Court ruling did not in any way outlaw the teaching of creation science in public schools. Quite simply, it ruled that in the form taken by the Louisiana law, it's unconstitutional to demand equal time for this subject. Creation science can still be brought into science classrooms if and when teachers and administrators feel it is appropriate. Numerous surveys have shown that teachers and administrators favor just this route. And in fact, creation science is being taught in science courses throughout the country. Eugenia Scott is the president of the National Center for Science Education. Well, what a lousy name. They're not in favor of science. They're in favor of defending evolution is all. She said, the Supreme Court decision says only that the Louisiana law violates the constitutional separation of church and state. It does not say that no one can teach scientific creationism, and unfortunately, many individual teachers do. Some school districts even require equal time for creation and evolution. Here's the web page, the head of the front home page on the National Center for Science Education. Welcome to the home page of NCSE, a non-profit, tax-exempt membership organization working to defend the teaching of evolution against sectarian attack. We are a nationally recognized clearinghouse for information and advice to keep evolution in the science classroom and scientific creationism out. That's why they exist. I spoke in Berkeley last November, Berkeley, California. That's where these guys are located. I went and visited the National Center for Science Education. It's a little bitty storefront building. They had, I think, 4 or 5 employees, all crammed in this little building. I thought, this is the National Center for Science Education. Oh, yeah, but property's expensive in Berkeley, I understand, good place for them. I went in there, they didn't know who I was. I didn't tell them my name. I went in there, hey, what kind of information do you guys hear? I used to be a science teacher. And they began giving me pamphlets and articles and stuff, finally one of the guys said, your voice sounds familiar, what's your name? I said, Kent Hovind. He said, I thought so. They taped a piece of paper on the floor that says Kent Hovind stood here. And I understand they won't walk on it. They walk around it. One of the guys came to all 10 hours that I lectured at Berkeley and asked me question after question after question. Look, these folks are not the enemy. Now, they do work for him, but they're not the enemy, okay? Satan is the enemy. They're just blinded, that's all. They're willingly ignorant, like the Bible says. But even the National Center for Science Education knows it's okay to teach creation if you want. William Provine said, teachers and school boards in public schools are already free under the Constitution of the United States to teach about supernatural origins if they wish in their science classes. Laws can be passed in most countries of the world requiring discussion of supernatural origins in science classes and still satisfy national legal requirements. And I have a suggestion for evolutionists. Include discussions of supernatural origins in your classes and promote discussion of them in public and other schools. Come off your high horse about having only evolution taught in science classes. The exclusionism you promote is painfully self-serving and smacks of elitism. Why are you afraid of confronting the supernatural creationism believed by the majority of persons in the U.S. and perhaps the worldwide? Good question. Why are they so afraid of this topic? I speak in public schools all the time. I'm telling you, some schools, though I can't get into, they are just absolutely afraid of having a creationist come in. There's no reason to fear. The fact is, most folks don't believe in evolution anyway. The fact is, there's no law saying you can't teach creation. Just go ahead. You don't know. It is against the law for the public school teacher to use tax dollars to try to convert the kids to be a Buddhist or Catholic or Baptist or something else. That is against the law. But it's not against the law to discuss creation. Provine said, shouldn't students be encouraged to express their beliefs about origins in a class discussing origins? If you're discussing origins, then let's discuss origins. But see, in the mind of the evolutionist, your answer must be naturalistic. Suppose I said, I want you to explain how computers came to be, but you cannot use man as your answer. I want a naturalistic explanation of how computers came to be. Well, you're dead in the water right up front because of the definitions I gave. And the evolutionist says, we have to explain how the world got here, but we can't use supernatural as an explanation. Well, duh. And what we got here is like two computers arguing with each other. Does man exist? They can't see him, they can't touch him, they can't feel him. But he does exist. See, it's obvious the creator would be outside of the creation. He's above and beyond. He's not affected by what he created. God created time, space, and matter. He's outside of time, space, and matter. God's not affected by time. This is not 2003 in heaven. There's no time. And after we get to heaven, one of the first things you're going to do is flip your watch off and fling it over the side. You won't need that. There's no time there. We sing all these songs, you know, when we've been there 10,000 years. That's baloney. It's a good song, I like it, but we're not going to be there 10,000 years, we're just going to be there. Now my brain can't handle that thought, but, you know, I can think about thinking about it. This public school teacher said, I'm a public school teacher, Mr. Hovind. I went to a conference today and we were all given a new science textbook to use in the conference. It's called Sciences by Triffel and Hazen and John Wiley and Sons. On page 611, it said this: to what extent do you think that parents should have the right to decide which scientific theories and ideas are presented in schools? To what extent do you think parents ought to have the right to demand that opposing religious views be taught as well? Should the views of creationism, which are primarily based on one particular type of Christianity, be given special consideration? It's getting more difficult to say the truth all the time. The teachers now are being trained in sessions to how to handle creationists. I know this, they work very hard to make you feel like you are the only one complaining. When I went to meet the lady in charge of the science curriculum here in Pensacola, Florida, when I first moved to town, I'd been complaining about some of the lies in the textbooks and the science curriculum, and she said to me, Mr. Hovind, you are the only person in the county complaining about this. I thought, there's what, 128 Baptist churches in this town, plus all the other flavors? I mean, what's everybody doing? Aren't we supposed to be the salt of the earth? Man, salt irritates. Go irritate somebody. That's our job. Teachers can teach creation science in the classroom if they want. There's never been a law against it. Not only can you teach creation science in the public schools, you can teach it right out of the Bible. There's no law against reading your Bible in public school or bringing your Bible to public school. Or you can teach or devote a class to religion, and you can have the textbook be the Bible. We know the effects what happened in '63 when the Bible was taken out and evolution was put in the schools, but we got deceived by the ACLU. In 1963, the Supreme Court banned the use of the Bible to get kids saved, which is not good, obviously, but it's a lot better than what the ACLU led us to believe. They did not throw the Bible out. We have thrown the Bible out because we've allowed ourselves to be deceived by the ACLU. You might want to get the website, BibleInSchools.net, and get the information by Elizabeth Ridenour. She helps people start Bible classes in their public school. Preacher, how'd you like to go every day and teach a Bible class to the public school kids at Tate or at Escambia High? Wouldn't it be awesome? You can do it. She knows how to cut through all the red tape and get it done. ACLU, well, we can talk a long time about that. Call BibleInSchools.net, get a hold of Elizabeth, or get the book from us, Teaching Creation Science in Public Schools. And, it's certainly fine to do that, and many schools do. States can require teachers to discuss evolution. They can do that. They set the state standards. The state school board or the legislature will rule and say, this is what we want the kids to know by 3rd grade or by 5th grade or by 7th grade. They have state standards. And they sometimes include evolution. The kid must know about evolution by 8th grade. Now the problem is, the atheists are really good at packing that committee. That way you only have to have 5 or 6 atheists in the whole state, and you can control what all the kids are learning. And then the Christians wait till the books are chosen to meet the standards and get in the classroom, and then we complain about the books in the classroom. You're about 3 years too late. State standards are going to be selected for Florida textbooks in the next 2 months. This is the time. It'll affect the books that they buy in '94, September '94. Now is the time to do something. The states cannot require them to discuss creation. It's already been tried many times. And I've seen so many people waste enormous time and money on an effort trying to force creation into the schools. I'm telling you, you're wasting your time. It's not going to happen. And the atheists love it when a campaign gets started to say, we're going to make the schools teach creation. They love that. They just let you spend all your money and waste all your time and then defeat you in the last 5 seconds. You're not going to go anywhere. The teachers may discuss creation if they like in their class. They've always been allowed to do that. You might want to get hold of the website textbookreviews.org. Mel Gabler. They, for 40-some years, have been doing research on public school textbooks and what's being taught. Mel said, the courts allow states to require discussing scientific weaknesses in evolution theory, but not requiring discussing evidence for creation. You can't make the teacher talk about creation, but you can require them to talk about the weaknesses in the evolution theory. That's a start. In the landmark decision back in 1963, the court held, it certainly may be said that the Bible is worthy of study for its literary and historic qualities. Nothing we have said here indicates that such study of the Bible or religion, when presented objectively as part of a secular program of education, may be effected consistently with the First Amendment. Supreme Court said, the Bible may constitutionally be used in an appropriate study of history, civilization, ethics, comparative religion, or the like. Eighth Circuit Court ruled and said, permitting public school observances which include religious elements promotes the secular cause of advancing the students' knowledge and appreciation of the role our religious heritage played in the social, cultural, and historical development of civilization. Teachers already possess the flexibility to present a variety of scientific theories about the origins of mankind and are free to teach any and all facets of this subject, 1987 Supreme Court. The court further ruled, teaching a variety of scientific theories about the origins of mankind to school children might be done with a clear secular intent of enhancing the effectiveness of science instruction. California State School Board said, discussions of any scientific fact, hypothesis, or theory related to the origins of the universe, the earth, and of life, the how, are appropriate to the science curriculum. They're telling their teachers, if you want to talk about creation, do it. Can't be more clear than that. If you want to keep up on the latest of what's happening in education, you might want to watch the video Crisis in the Classroom from Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly's organization. Now, I would disagree with Phyllis on several philosophical things, but I think she's done a great job with this video here on what's happening. So people say, what about the separation of church and state? Doesn't the Constitution say that? There's no such phrase mentioned in the Constitution. That phrase is found mentioned in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Baptist Association in Danbury, Connecticut. The Constitution does not talk about separation of church and state. That's a lie. Jefferson said, the First Amendment has erected a wall of separation between church and state. That's from his letter, not from the Constitution. By the way, this wall is a one-dimensional wall. It keeps the government from running the church, but makes sure the church Christian principles will always stay in government. Go see David Barton's excellent website, wallbuilders.com. If you want to get more on how all the Founding Fathers believed the church had to influence government or government would go corrupt. All right, it's happened. What's happened over the years, several different people have taken upon themselves to survey the textbooks and see how much evolution is in this book. These guys did a survey of all the biology books used in 1991, and they found out the one used by Merrill, called Biology and Everyday Experience, only had 2.9% of the text devoted to evolution. It really wasn't talked about much. However, HBJ had 15.6%. They really crammed evolution down the throat of those kids. I've seen books today that have nearly 30%. Well, if I was on the committee to select textbooks this year, I would pick the least poisonous book I could find. And then I would write to the publishers of the other ones and say, hey folks, we did not pick your book this year because, and spell out your reasons. And then I would write to the one I did pick and say, hey fellas, we did pick your book this year because you got the least amount of evolution. However, we would like that out also. And we want to warn you, if we find another one next time that has less, we're going to buy them. You see, folks, there's only one language these textbook publishers speak. The only language they speak is money. Now, if you were the CEO at HBJ, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, and you got letters from all over the country from people saying, hey, we did not buy your book this year because guess what you're going to do next year? Only language they speak, brother. If you want to get an excellent book on some of the lies in the textbooks to see what you ought to be watching for, get this one here by Jonathan Wells, excellent book on icons of evolution. Or you may want to get the book by the Gablers. They've spent 40 years discussing lies in the textbooks and what you can do about it. Excellent ministry in Longview, Texas. Go to textbookreviews.org or to crsc.org. They've got a newer review of the more modern textbooks. Mel wrote me a letter, said, Dr. Hovind, thank you for using our book. What are they teaching our children? You'll be interested to know that in the 39 years of work, we've never seen publishers so sensitive or schools so receptive to our textbook reviews and ranking. We're pleased to recommend Harcourt Scott Forsman Elementary Science. They are much less dogmatic on evolution than the others we reviewed. Mel says the publishers are scared to death of their letters of recommendation because they know the sales of those that aren't recommended plummet in the States. But here's what happens. They only work in Texas. Texas is one of the largest publishers largest buyers of textbooks in the nation. So the publishers will publish all these books, spend billions of dollars, millions of dollars publishing these books. They try to sell them. If Texas doesn't buy them, do you think they're going to burn them? No, they're going to go peddle them off in some other state that's not looking. The Gablers have a crew of folks. They'll help find errors in the textbooks. Like a book might say, George Washington was Abraham Lincoln's vice president or something like that, Dumb stuff. And they're not about to throw that book away. I mean, they spent a lot of money printing that thing. Nice, beautiful paper, colored pictures. They're going to find some state that's not looking. So if you're in some state other than Texas, you better really be on the lookout. Get a hold of the Gablers, and they'll tell you which ones to watch for. And they work on a donation basis, and don't be a tightwad with them. Send them $50 and say, here, send me your letters of recommendation. Adolf Hitler said, let me control the textbooks, I'll control the state. What's in these books anyway? And what can I do to fix this problem? Well, this chart shows how the atheists have rated the different states in America and how well they teach evolution. They think here in Florida we're doing a lousy job of teaching evolution. Yay! They think the folks in Minnesota, where I was yesterday morning, are doing a wonderful job teaching evolution. You ought to be ashamed of yourself in Minnesota. Get that junk out of your textbooks, okay? You can get creation materials and put them in your library. Bert Wagner, up in Iowa, knows how to cut through all the red tape and get this done. Get a hold of Bert and say, well, how do I get public schools to accept creation books? One guy wrote me a letter and said, Dr. Hovind, your video series was bought for our local high school, Waverly High, in Ohio. When I went to check out video number 5, I found someone had hidden the box of seminars and debates unopened and underneath the desk by a back wall. I was told by the librarian that she was told not to put them out for the students to find. My 18-year-old daughter witnessed this. We were very upset, but I was told it was proof that the enemy was trying to void and hide the truth. My daughter has since graduated and don't know if those tapes are available to students or not. So if you do donate something, be sure to check and make sure it is, kept on the shelf. I went to one big university one time, and I spent probably an hour going through their computer search system, looking for how many books they had on evolution. It was like 18 or 1900 books about evolution. And then I searched to see how many books they had about creation. This is a big university library. Not one book. I searched every author that I know, and I know most of them. I went to the librarian and I said, I noticed you got 1,800 books on evolution, but you don't have any books on creation. Why is that? She said, there is too a good book in here on creation. She said, I put it in here myself. It's from my church, the Watchtower Society. Oh, brother, we got one Jehovah's Witness book in here, and 1,800 teaching evolution. And then they brag about being a liberal university and giving the kids a liberal education. You're lying. A liberal education is when you look at all sides. Let's just discuss all sides and then decide where the truth lies. They don't want to compare evolution with creation because evolution looks stupid next to the truth. There's some practical things we can do, folks, to fix this. Number one, you can demand that the schools cut out the pages with false information. You don't have to get creation in the schools, and you don't have to get evolution out. Just simply get the lies out. You can tell them you want them to glue the pages together, or you can at least put a warning sticker on the front cover saying, kids, the information on page 97 is not correct. Or, list the pages. I volunteered many times, and I'll do it again. I will, if you will, send me your textbook. I will check the pages that need to be torn out, and I'll make a tape recording while I'm traveling someplace, and I'll hand you the tape, and it'll say, the information on page 84 is wrong, tear that page out, and page 217 is wrong, and I'll list the pages. And if you tore the pages out of the book, it won't cost the school 1 penny. I'll show you. It's so simple. Because the first objection they're going to say is, oh, this would cost the schools a lot of money. Won't cost them a penny. How many of you would volunteer to tear the pages out of the books and bring your own scissors? Let me see. There you go. So when you go to your school board, hand them a list of 500 names and say, these people are willing. When would you like it done? Won't cost a thing. Look, the book is not sacred. It's made out of paper, If you bought it, the county bought it, it belongs to the school. If you want to tear a page out, that's perfectly fine. I was in a debate with a professor at University. I was just speaking at UWF here a year or so ago, and I mentioned tear the page out of the book, and this one professor said, I don't think we should deface textbooks. I said, well, sir, if you were teaching math and you came across the book that said, 2 plus 2 is 5, what would you do? He said, I would tell the students to mark out the wrong answer and write in the right answer. I said, oh, you would deface a textbook? I said, now, sir, if you were teaching biology and you found a book that said the embryo has gills and you know that's proven wrong in 1874, what are you going to do? He said, well, nothing. I said, you wouldn't correct it? He said, no. I said, well, then you, sir, are a hypocrite. And you got no business using tax dollars to lie to these kids. You ought to get a different job changing tires or picking peaches and work for a living for a change. Guys like that burn me up, brother. Like a leech, sucking on somebody else's blood that they built, Number 4, you can give the kids my little brainwashed book. There are different people around the country that buy these by the thousand and give them out to people in their schools. One guy from Santa Rosa County bought 3,000 of these books several years ago, gave them to all the kids in the county. They're going to have a hard time teaching evolution for a while over there. Buy some books, or go to your school board and say, would you please vote to purchase this book to go along with our biology book so the kids can see the lies in their books. If the school board buys them, great. If you get them, more than 10, you get them for $1 a piece. If the school board says, no, we don't want those books in school, then you run a full-page ad in your paper, stop by the following address and pick up the book the school board banned. Now the kids will get it and read it. Yeah. Florida has a law. They've changed the number now. It used to be 233.09E, I believe, but they changed it so people couldn't find it, I guess. It's now Florida Statute 1006.35, accuracy of instructional materials. State of Florida legislature can vote to recall books if they're not accurate. They can write letters to the publishers and demand that they change the books. The law's on the books, folks. The textbooks are supposed to be accurate, but they're not. They contain 50-some lies in every textbook I've seen. Get the pages out. Texas has a law requiring textbooks to be accurate. Wisconsin has a law requiring textbooks to be accurate. Alabama has a law that says textbooks shall be adequate and current. Well, if they're still teaching the baby has gill slits, they're not current. They're 128 years behind the times. Alabama used to have a sticker. They modified it now, watered it down some, but the sticker used to say, this textbook discusses evolution, a controversial theory. And students need to learn there's a difference between microevolution, which is a fact, and macroevolution, which is not a fact. Go Bama. California has a requirement, textbooks shall be factually accurate. Many states have this requirement, but they're just simply not enforcing it. Did you know the publishers will publish a special book just for our state? If the committee got together and said, look, Glencoe, we like your book, however, we want you to take out chapter 3. Or take out the following pages. Do you know how much money is spent just in one school district on textbooks? The publisher would be foolish not to turn down a contract for $750,000. they'll publish a special book. They do it all the time for different states. Get on that committee and do something about it. You can also, parents, be aware that your kids can be exempted from anything you don't want them taught. If you don't want your kids taught evolution, you sign a little paper that says, I do not want my student taught evolution. It's against my religious convictions. Have it notarized, signed, and give it to the school principal, the teacher, superintendent. And if they do teach your kid evolution, or if they say, oh, you've got to stay in class, then you can simply say, do you discriminate against people because of their religion? Ooh, that'll get their attention. You can email our office. We've got a guy that works I pay him to work for us. And we ask folks to give a donation, please, because I'm going to pay this paralegal a bunch of money. But if you're having trouble in your school, email mauryadkins@hotmail.com, or just our office if you can't get a hold of him, and we'll have people take care of this. If the school gives you a hard time about making your kid learn evolution, we can fix that. See, if you don't know your rights, you might as well not even have them. Now, here are some pitfalls you got to watch for in your school. I've seen this so many times. If the school is going to have a good program, some left-wing liberal will make sure that it's an opt-in program. In other words, you have to get parents' permission to go to the program. This happens all the time when I speak in schools. The kids have to come back with a note and saying it's okay for me to go to Hovind's program. But if you're going to have some homosexual speak in your school, or some lesbian about the gay lifestyle, which is not gay at all, and it's not a lifestyle, it's a death style. If they're going to speak in your school, they'll make sure it's an opt-out program. You see the difference? In other words, you have to get a note in order to not come. But if it's a good program, you got to get the note to go. And if it's a bad program, you got to get a note to not go. They don't want a level playing field, folks. And if you have a superintendent or a school principal that tries that one, you ought to help him get a different job too. Put the pressure on. He just needs to find a new job, maybe in a new county someplace. Some practical steps you can do. Number one, kids, don't confront your teachers publicly. Try to talk to them after class. Now listen carefully. If you are late to class frequently, if you're a troublemaker or a goof-off, if you never do your homework, if you don't pay attention in class, then please don't tell them you're a Christian. Shut your mouth. First, be a good student. Now, if a question comes up on the test that says, how old is the Earth? And you know the answer they want, you can simply write on the test, the textbook says 4.6 billion. However, this is not correct. Now they know you learned the book, you did your homework, but you don't believe it, you didn't swallow it. That's perfectly fine. If they give you a hard time or mark that answer wrong, please let us know. We've had probably 350 cases now where we've had Maury or somebody write a letter to these folks and saying, do you realize you just discriminated against a Christian? Well, you're right, we'll fix the grade. Get it fixed every time. You can learn the material, but don't swallow it. Number two, you can ask to be exempt. Now, parents have to do this, the kids can't do it. I am not positive of that statement, but I believe it has to be done by the parents. You have to say, I want my child exempt from anything that's against our religion. Sign a note, give it to the school. Look, if 40 or 50 or 60% of the class was standing out in the hallway, it wouldn't take the teacher long to figure out, we ought to just skip that chapter. I had one guy call me up one day, he said, Bill Hovind, my second grade daughter has watched your videotapes probably 50 times. She can quote them. I don't know why kids watch the same tape over and over and over and over. He said, my second grade daughter's teacher just called me. And she said, sir, every time I talk about something in the class having to do with evolution, your daughter stops me and says, teacher, no, that's not right. And the teacher said, I just want you to know, I'm going to skip evolution for the rest of the time this girl's in my class. My first thought was, yay, this is great. And then I thought, why are we sending second graders off to war? Why aren't the parents fighting this battle? The second grader ought to be able to go to class and read the book and believe what they're taught. Why are we allowing lies in the textbooks? Why are we allowing liars to teach? Don't lie to the kids. You can contact Joe Baker. He helps folks set up meetings on getting kids in their school fired up on to do something in their local school. Joe had me come speak at his high school in Pennsylvania. They had an auditorium, seats about 1,000 people. They had 1,500 people come. The principal was pulling his hair out, nervous as a cat, thinking the fire marshal's going to come, arrest me and throw me in jail, They turned away like 300 people at the door, said, no, you can't get in. And I spoke for over 2 hours at that public high school in Pennsylvania. Joe Baker arranged the whole thing, and he's been on fire for God ever since. Get a hold of him and say, what can I do in my school? If you're a public school student and you want to do something, Joe can help you get going. Some practical steps. You can give your teachers a video to watch at home. You can pray for them. Teaching is a tough job. My brother's in his 34th year. He said, Kent, it's not fun anymore. I can't wait to quit teaching. I'm sick of this. Teaching public school up in Illinois. My mom retired from teaching public school. You can invite your teachers to a creation seminar. You can have them call me with any questions. You can ask my secretary, Martha, sitting right there. I take questions all day long and half the night. I'll be glad to help. You can ask them to have a creation speaker speak in your public school. I've got a list of about 8 pages of names of other people that speak on creation. We'll be glad to get somebody to you as quick as we can. Some of you could run for school board. You could influence the textbook selection committee. You could pass or enforce the laws requiring books to be accurate. The Bible says the fear of man bringeth a snare. And we got a bunch of Christians that are scared to do anything for fear somebody might not like them. Duh. We're supposed to be Christians, you know. They didn't like the disciples very well, or Jesus himself, did they? Our job is to do what's right. Leave the results up to him. Okay. You can try to convert the teachers or the students. You could write letters to the editor. That's what got my whole ministry started, brother. You and I were working together at the factory at M&A. Article came out of the newspaper that said dinosaur bones are found from 80 million years ago. And I wrote my first ever letter to the editor. I'd never written to the editor before. I said, these dinosaur bones were from the flood of Noah, 4,400 years ago. Well, man, you would have thought I shot the sacred cow. For the next 6 or 8 months here in Pensacola, I got called every name you can imagine in the paper. And I wrote letters back and forth, and other people wrote letters. And finally, the university asked me to come do a debate, and a couple churches asked me to come speak, and now it's 14 years later, and I got 30 people on my staff, and get, 20 calls a week, Martha asked me to come. 55? It's crazy. There's a war going on. Get in.
Amen.
Find something to do. You can donate some creation books to your public library or public school library. We get calls and letters just about every week from somebody getting saved because they watched a video or read a book that they checked out of their public library. One of our videos. Donate some. You could educate others to use creation as a means of evangelism. Here's what the ACLU will do, though. They will threaten a lawsuit if somebody tries to teach creation. Now, they know they would lose. It doesn't matter. The fact that it's going to be a lawsuit is going to be costly for the school. So the ACLU, knowing they'll lose, threatens to sue, and sometimes even sues. Knowing the school will back down for fear of not having enough money to defend themselves. They're winning by default. They claim teachers can only teach what is in state-approved curriculum. Well, that's a lie. The curriculum really starts when the classroom door closes. Every teacher knows that. And every teacher discusses things in their class that are not in the textbook. Come on, you can't teach otherwise. They claim teachers cannot correct the curriculum. That's a lie. They do it all the time. I taught math and science for years. I was always making corrections in the math book. They mislead people into thinking that evolution is a sacred part of science that's never to be questioned. They use peer pressure or ridicule to silence those who oppose lies in the textbooks. Now, if you're going to do something, you be prepared for opposition from the enemy. Satan protects his evolution theory with a vengeance. This is the foundation for all sorts of things. Roger DeHart, science teacher at Burlington Edson High School in Seattle, was told he could not inform students of errors in the textbooks just simply by passing out current science journals. If there's a current science journal that said this is wrong, he couldn't tell his students because in the book it said it was right. Some of these lies have been proven wrong 100 years ago. Kevin Haley, biology teacher at Oregon Community College, lost his job simply for exposing errors in the textbooks. Baylor University, formerly Christian University, fired William Dembski just because he advocated intelligent design. He said there must be a designer. Forrest Mims was a science writer for 20 years. He published in National Geographic, Science Digest, American Journal of Physics, 60 magazines and newspapers. He was denied a job as science writer for Scientific American simply because he was a creationist. Rod LeVake in Faribault, Minnesota, was reassigned because he doubted Darwin's theory. They said, we don't want you teaching evolution. We don't want you teaching biology if you doubt Darwin's theory. Dan Clark in Lafayette, Indiana, he quit because he was reprimanded for teaching an evolution alternative. The superintendent, Mr. Ed Eller, told him not to introduce creationism to this class. Well, Mr. Ed Eller, you need to get a different job. Our grass needs mowed once in a while. Come on down, we might put you to work if you're a hard worker, okay? He said, I'm quitting, I'm not going to take this. There's all kinds of articles here. Dean Kenyon was a tenured professor in San Francisco at the university. He'd been teaching for years. He wrote books about evolution, how wonderful evolution was. He was the poster boy of the evolutionist. And then one day he got converted. And they fired him. But he said, hey, I got 20 years, you can't fire me. Oh, okay. They put him in as a lab assistant, you know, washing test tubes. Had to go through a whole big lawsuit just to get his job back, simply because he doubted Darwin's theory. So don't think it's going to be an easy road. There's some things you can do. Cut the pages out. Get something done in your area. There's all kinds of practical steps. You can watch our video 4 for other stuff like that. All right. Why is this theory dangerous? It's dangerous because it's bad science backed up by lies. Number 2, it brings forth bad fruit. All the effects of evolution that I know of are evil and wicked. We teach the kids they're an animal. We teach them there's no moral standard, there's no absolute. What do you expect? This theory has led directly to the rise of communism, humanism, Marxism, Nazism, socialism, and the coming New World Order. Amen. We're going to cover more on that tomorrow night. The dangers of this evolution theory. Folks, it's not just dumb, it's dangerous. That's right. You're going to be shocked and see how many people have died because of this theory. Why did we fight the Vietnam War? Why did we fight World War II? Why was World War I fought? Why are we fighting against communism? How many people did Hitler kill? How many did Stalin kill? We'll cover all that tomorrow night.
Whenever life gets you down in this town and things are hard or tough and people are stupid, obnoxious, or daft, and you feel that you've had quite enough, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving and revolving at 900 miles an hour. It's orbiting at 90 miles a second, so it's reckoned a sun that is the source of all our power. The sun and you and me and all the stars that we can see are moving at 1,000,000 miles a day in an outer spiral arm at 40,000 miles an hour of the galaxy we call the Milky Way. Our galaxy itself contains 100 billion stars. It's 100,000 light years side to side. It bulges in the middle, 16,000 light years thick, but out by us is just 3,000 light years wide. We're 30,000 light years from galactic central point. We go round every 200 million years. And our galaxy is only one of millions of billions in this amazing and expanding universe. Keeps on expanding and expanding in all of the directions it can whiz, as fast as it can go, and the speed of light, you know, 12 million miles a minute, and that's the fastest speed there is. So remember when you're feeling very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth, and pray that there's intelligent life somewhere up in space, 'cause there's bugger all down here on Earth. Sure. Now speaking of this Constitution, I've heard people say with a perfectly straight face that the Constitution it's outdated, outmoded, and it was written by a bunch of white. Actually, one person actually used the word honky. Rich white guys, and so therefore implying it's not to be taken seriously.
Sure. Well, I mean, right off the bat, my answer to that is that is spoken from an evolutionary assumption. When they assume that it's outdated, what's the premise there? That everything's changed since then, and the principles, like the principle of just compensation for private property, is no longer valid, or you know what I'm saying? What they're simply saying is that they're expressing their evolutionary worldview and their biases, and they're expressing the notion that there's no absolutes. And what I always say is that theft is always wrong, even when it's done in broad daylight by majority vote. And it was wrong 200 years ago when it was done by individuals or government, and it's wrong today when it's done by individuals or government. In other words, we're talking about those transcendent absolute truths that never change, and that's one of them, thievery. And so those kinds of comments, I think, are spoken from a bias that sometimes it's hard to overcome, but I disagree with it. It's our founding fathers were, for the most part, were extremely well-versed, well-educated, well-read. They applied...
Did you say well-educated?
Well-educated, absolutely.
So did they go to public schools?
They actually didn't have public schools in the sense that we have them here. You know, it'll shock most people to know that we never had. Horace Mann did not come along and he didn't get his first Board of Education, and I think it was 1837 in Massachusetts. The common schools were nothing like what we have today in the monopolistic system of the government schools. In fact, the first compulsory attendance law wasn't until, I believe, 1852 in Massachusetts with Horace Mann's. That was his goal, by the way.
Was that the old, what do they call it, the Deluder Act?
Actually, no, that was in the that was 1647, the old Deluder Satan Act. But at the same time, that was the Puritans recognizing and expressing their concern in their schools, but as far as I remember, Rich, those were more community schools, and the communities as a commonwealth were this was not mandated down from in a sense of a federal government. It was more of a community thing.
And it was voluntary, wasn't it?
Well, as far as I know, you know, I need to do some research. I don't want to misspeak, but yeah, and I know that was what they would reference as the first compulsion in education, because the Puritans understood and wanted their children to be well versed in the Bible, so that they wouldn't be deluded by Satan.
Right. Now, I notice you've got a couple of books here, and you keep making references to them or looking at them. Or can you tell us a little bit about what you got there?
Well, you know, I think one of the most important little books, it's a 76-page book as far as people that love liberty and freedom and want to reestablish it. I think one of the most significant books is a little book by Frederick Bastiat called The Law. And the subtitle is The Classic Blueprint for a Just Society.
And a close-up of that.
And most people are familiar with Walter Williams. Walter Williams, this is a new printing from Foundation for Economic Education.
Maybe you can get a close-up of that.
Yeah, if you can see that. But and I get these from Fee, and I've handed quite a few of them out. But as far as I'm concerned, it's again, it's 76 pages of the finest refutation of socialism and support of individual freedom and true justice that I've ever come across. So I highly recommend that to folks. And you can get that from the Foundation for Economic Education on Irvington-on-Hudson in New York. If you're on the internet, I would just do a search for Foundation for Economic Education. And another book I have here, and I don't know how much time we have, Rich, but is one of my all-time favorite books, and I paid a lot of money for this because it's out of print. It's called Tucker's Constitutional Law. And it is extremely well researched. It's copyrighted in 1899. But Judge Tucker did a expose on the whole Constitution and advocates the principle of constitutional government through original intent. And there's a lengthy paragraph here that.
Well, it doesn't look too long. Why don't you go ahead and give it a shot?
Yeah, maybe we've got time to get it in, and if people could concentrate long enough to read this, I think this states the principle of constitutional government perhaps better than anything I've come across. This is how he says it. This principle, the supremacy of the body politic as constitution maker, and the subordination of the government as the delegated agent of the body politic, with no powers but those derived from the body politic by virtue of the Constitution, is therefore the foundation of American constitutional law. All acts of every department of government within the constitutional bounds of power are valid. All beyond bounds are irritum et inane. That's Latin, which means null and void. Government, therefore, has no inerrant authority, but only such as is delegated to it by its sovereign principle. Government may transcend the limits of this authority, but its act is nonetheless void. It cannot, by usurpation, jurily enlarge its powers, nor by construction stretch them beyond the prescribed limits. Now, don't you wish our Supreme Court understood that in this day and age, in many of our federal courts and our Congress? The idea that usurpation or necessity or a supposed extension as the consequence of custom or progress, evolutionary premise, or progress of society can make jural any power not constitutionally conferred is contrary to American political science, fatal to the liberties of the people, and is only a wicked pretext for the violation of sworn obligations. Such an idea would really mean this, and listen to this as he says this, because I believe this is exactly where we're at. Such an idea would really mean this, that persistent usurpations of power by a government acting under the prescribed limitations of a written constitution could amend and change that constitution, which by its terms can only be amended and changed by the body politic itself. It would make the government a self-creator of its own powers, instead of the creation of the body politic with only delegated powers. It would take sovereignty from the people and vest it in their government, and transfer all political authority by flagrant usurpation from the body politic to the omnipotent government. And this is the last sentence, and it's well said. Written constitutions would be destroyed, and the self-usurped omnipotence of irresponsible government would be erected upon their ruins. Now, I know that's a little bit lengthy and perhaps hard to understand, and if it's not right in front of you, but this is basically where we're at now, where we have government with no assumption of constitutional limitations. Just assuming that if you can get 50% plus one to vote for it, then you can do it.
Well, not only that, but I understand that if you go into the courtroom and you talk about the Constitution, the judge is likely to shut you down and effectively tell you to shut up about the Constitution, or I'll have you in contempt with the court.
And that's exactly right. I have not experienced that myself, but I've heard others, and that is very confusing to me. And I'm certainly not an expert in that area, but it is. I have no idea how they can get away with that. Because the Constitution supersedes all statutory law. If the statutes aren't based on the Constitution, they're null and void, or aren't consistent with the Constitution.
Well, one explanation might be that our courts are not constitutional courts, that they're working out of the corporate, municipal corporation, the corporate state, as opposed to the constitutional republic, or the one of the sovereign states of the Union.
And Rich, you're in an area where I certainly don't have any expertise, and I've heard that argument, and it ties in with the improper flag being in the courthouse, and the 14th Amendment and the corporate citizen thing. And I certainly don't have expertise to speak on that, but it certainly is a concern of mine when we have courts that are mandating that defendants cannot use the Constitution in their defense. That should raise eyebrows and ire.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that the jurors are told that they cannot judge the law.
And that's a basic principle. Even in our Montana Constitution, it states that in cases of slander, the jury has the right to judge the facts and the law. And all through history, our founder fathers reiterated that. That was another check on government usurpations, that the jury could find the law unconstitutional in a case, that an individual could be innocent because the law is inappropriate, even if the facts indicated that the letter of the law was violated. So yes, and that issue came up. We tried to pass the fully informed jury amendment. Of course, we I don't remember what the vote was, but we weren't real close. But I think that's another area where citizens need to educate themselves so that they understand their responsibilities, so that they know the Constitution, and that serving on the jury and knowing these things is absolutely vital and important. I don't know how much time we have, Rich, but if I could, I just grabbed my Constitution here, and I'd like to just make another point that people...
Please do.
I get frustrated when we have a time right now when there's a concern that we have our judiciary branch of government is out of control. And I don't think all the fault lays there, because I think Congress is largely at fault, because they're not upholding their end of the deal as far as their constitutional authority to get these judges in check. But I want to point out that this is just another example where really ignorance on the part of the populace is allowing for this tyranny and despotism to continue. And under Article 3 in Section 1 of the Constitution, it establishes the judges, and it says most people are under the impression that judges serve for life. But that's not the wording of the Constitution.
Oh, it's not.
The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, still hold or shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation. And it goes on. See, it says nothing about serving for life, but it says that they shall serve during good behavior. Now, what they meant by that, of course, in my opinion, is that good behavior is being within the context of the Constitution in their branch of government. Now, the Congress has a responsibility to determine whether their behavior is good or not. And it allows, if I can find it very quickly here, in Article 3, or excuse me, I believe it's Article, well, the exact number escapes me, but it is the impeachment power is given to the House of Representatives, and trying impeachments is given to the Senate. And when we have the United States Supreme Court, as the case in Texas, for example, or you can go clear back to Roe v. Wade, but in the Lawrence case in Texas, where they actually cited international law when they found this so-called right to sodomy. in the Constitution. Now, I believe that Congress is being derelict in their duty when they did not address those judges, either by limiting their power as they're authorized to do, if I come across it here, or by impeaching them. Because I think that's treasonous when we have judges that place international law and the sovereignty of our country over, or the international law over the sovereignty of our country and the Constitution. But that's just an example that some of our ignorance perhaps has led to these usurpations, and we don't confront that as citizens because we don't know.
Right. Well, and besides, it's easier to just go home and watch The Simpsons.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, it is. Yeah.
And drink that six-pack and just
Yeah.
unwind from another day as a slave. Well, by the way, I guess I never... Have you ever seen this?
A Liberty Dollar?
Yeah.
I have. I have seen the Liberty Dollar, and I think that's another area. And just to let people know, the Constitution Party believes that the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and 1913 wasn't a good year for our country. We got the income tax, we got the Federal Reserve Act in that same year, and part of our platform is that the Federal Reserve System needs to be abolished, and we need to have real money in our country. It's too easy for our government to debase our Federal Reserve notes. We call them dollars, but they're not dollars.
Right.
Through this, and we're seeing it right now by deficit spending. Are you having luck using that as an exchange? I can't imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I spend these... I just got one. Just on the way over here, I used this to get my haircut at Headliners. Headliner Barber, right by the old Good Food store. And I used these to get my gas. I've done dozens of gas stations all over California, Oregon, Washington, and I spend them at the doctor and dentist, and on and on. I could just go on and on about all the places I've spent them. And why not? It is real money.
Yeah.
It's just not legal tender.
True.
And what's happened is we've got this silly notion that if it doesn't come from the government, it's not legitimate. If we don't have a state marriage license, it's not a real marriage. If we don't have legal tender, it's not real money. We could go on and on about that.
Right.
Well, speaking of common law marriage, now that I brought that up, do you have anything to say about common law marriage as opposed to the state license?
Well, it's certainly not an area where I'm an expert in, but let me just mention this. Obviously, I'm adamantly opposed to homosexual marriage or any marriage between any two individuals or group of individuals except a man and a woman. But at the same time, I personally do not support the federal marriage amendment. And I think for reasons that you are leading into, in that a marriage is a covenant between God and a man and a wife. And God established marriage, and He ordained marriage. And I agree that it's improper for the state to be involved in that arena. I mean, if we have, when I say the state, I'm talking civil government, but when we move it with what this federal marriage amendment will do, in my opinion, is create bureaucracies on the federal level. I mean, I think many people know and understand that we have out of control agencies at the state level dealing with, you know, the Department of Family Service, for instance, deciding when and where and they're going to remove children from their parents. Well,
Not
just
in this country.
yeah, the whole land of the free and the home of the brave, and yeah, it's a travesty, and I think it's a big problem. And of course, under their definitions, they can basically define child abuse however they want to. But many people think that me keeping my children home from a school is child abuse, and so these are the kind of traps that I think that we need to understand, that things like the federal marriage amendment. I mean, again, I'm obviously opposed to homosexual marriage, but I'm not to have to admit. I mean, this whole country is based, or at least it was based on what our founding fathers called self-evident truths. And if it's not self-evident that marriage is between a man and a woman, then I don't think anything is more self-evident. And do you actually, if you have to spell that out in your federal constitution and put it under the federal government, then everything virtually would have, I mean, it seems to me foolish to have such self-evident things have to be spelled out by amendment to the Constitution, as if the Constitution has been not adequate to address those things. I mean, we've had freedom and prosperity for many years without that. I think it's a much bigger problem than what we want to admit. It's this foundation of our whole society crumbling because we've bought into these notions of secularism and moral relativism and those kinds of things.
Right. Now, are there any other documents besides the Constitution and, well, obviously the Declaration of Independence that informed sovereign citizens should read and study to become knowledgeable, responsible citizens?
When you say documents, are you talking historical documents? Rather
For
than just
example.
books?
Yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah.
I have, and you may have different things in mind. In my library, I have lots of. I love some of the old. I like John Locke's writings, his treatises on civil government. I like the Mayflower Compact. I think that says a lot more than what we. It's very short and simple and precise, but the principles there express the principles of self-government. And of course, the idea of man under God, and the. I'm just thinking of one of my favorite books at home is called the Christian History of the Constitution of the United States, and it has all kinds of different documents in it, and John Locke's writings are in there, and I'm trying to think of the other one. The Plymouth Plantation is a great one to read as far as I'm concerned, and there's others. My mind's not working very well right now.
Articles of Confederation?
The article and the Connecticut Fundamental Orders of Connecticut are quite interesting to read. And the Articles of Confederation, yes, and the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. I enjoy it. If you really want to advocate for the original intent of the Constitution, regardless of whether you were on the Anti-Federalist or the Federalist side. I had an individual who was in Congress previously write me a note when I pointed out some of these restrictions in the Constitution that were being violated, and he said, "Rick, the Anti-Federalists lost the debate." And he said that in the sense that he assumed the Federalists would agree with his gross exaggerations of the federal government doing all of these socialistic things that they're doing. But that's not the case at all. I mean, the anti-federalists saw the dangers of some of the Constitution, and of course many of them demanded the Bill of Rights, for instance, etc. And but the Federalists, even who compared to the anti-federalists, wanted a stronger central government. Even Alexander Hamilton and some of those that among the Federalists were the most staunch advocates of a stronger federal government. They would have never, and you can read their writings. And Hamilton, for instance, wrote in the Federalist Papers, and they never would have assumed that the federal government would be involved in things that they are today. Not in any manner. Not at, things like education and health care and health and human services. That was never their intent at all, even those that advocated strong central government.
Not long ago, I brought up the Constitution. I was talking to some, I don't understand. Everywhere I go, people want to talk about it. But anyway, she said something on the order of, well, the Constitution was written back when there were a lot fewer people. Now we've got so many more people that the Constitution can't possibly address all these issues. So how would you respond to that?
Well, I respond to that the same way I responded when I was in the legislature when I was challenged by basically that same question. And the principles never change. It doesn't, private property, for instance, let me just use the Fifth Amendment for an example, cannot be taken without just compensation for public use, by the way, and now government's taking it for private use. Unbelievable. These total violations of property where cities and counties, for instance, in the name of economic development, are actually using the power of eminent domain to confiscate private property and then turn around and sell it to another private individual. All in the name of economic development, because this is a better and higher use and we'll get more taxes and more jobs, etc. Well, the principle never changes, whether it's a horse and a plow or a personal computer. Private property cannot be taken without just compensation. And so most of these arguments against the Constitution, again, are being made with an evolutionary bias. They simply don't want to accept the fact that the ethics that our founding fathers based the Constitution on are absolute and transcendent. And they want them to evolve so that they can justify what they want government to do for them. Usually it's consume somebody else's labor for their benefit.
Oh, I see. Now, you mentioned about the Declaration of Independence and some of the grievances that were mentioned in there. And you mentioned that what they were complaining about was hardly anything compared to what we've got to complain about today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, tax dollars weren't being used at that time to kill unborn babies. And one of their complaints, which were so well articulated by Jefferson in the Declaration, for instance, was he has erected, they're talking about King George III, of course. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Now, I don't have the documentation, but my understanding is that the tax rate as far as as a percentage of the gross national product at that time was, I've heard 1% or 3% or something like that. But I mean, when you talk about erecting a multitude of new offices.
Was he a time traveler?
A time traveler. King George. Which King George we're talking about, maybe we could talk about. But I was just on the website of, well, I don't want to misspeak here, so I better not say one of the taxpayer groups anyway. And it's the one that keeps track of Tax Freedom Day. And but a better a better number to look at that tells the picture better is the Cost of Government Day, and it was July 7th this year, if my memory serves me right. So they're talking. They were man enough to stand up to King George and basically tell him to take a flying leap with a less than 5%, I think it was much less than that, tax rate, and yet today it's way over 50%. I mean, July 7th is we're into the 7th month, the cost of government, because you can't just count the total cost just on taxes, because as they indicated in that, actually it may have been an article, it was an article in Investors Business Daily that I read. And the cost of government, when you add regulations, $800 billion a year is added when you figure in the cost of those regulations. So, I mean, their argument, many people will say, well, at least we have representation. And again, that's based on that fallacy. They didn't have no taxation without representation. Well, we have taxation, we have representation. So does that legitimize them taking 50+% of our livelihood? You see what I'm saying? And again, my contention is no. And
of course, that's not to mention the hidden tax called inflation.
There you go. That's exactly right. And again, it's very unfortunate that most people don't understand that. I always say it this way, Rich. The Republicans, they've got, and I'm going to speak frankly, I was in the legislature as a Republican for 6 years, and I'm telling you, socialism promoted by Republicans is just as bad as socialism promoted by Democrats, and we're getting that. And what the Republicans do, for instance, is they pass these tax cuts, and they emphasize them in their campaigning, and as the Bush tax cuts did. Well, I'm all for tax cuts, believe me. But unless you have spending cuts, then basically what it boils down to is you have tax and spend with the Democrats, or you have bond and spend with the Republicans. But it's just a matter of how you pay it. Do you pay it in the income tax with the Democrats, or do you pay it with the tax called inflation with the Republicans? See, and it's deceitful.
Now, just to remind the viewers, what is inflation? What causes it?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert or an economist, and perhaps they'd have a more refined definition than I have. But in my mind, inflation is actually almost a misnomer, because it's actually not an increase in prices as much as it is a decrease in the value of what we call money. And it's unfortunately, that's not a dollar. It's a Federal Reserve note. It's a debt instrument. It's based on debt. And it's just a piece of paper that really has no value except the value that my confidence as a consumer or a trader in the economy places on it. And what happens, as you know, Rich, and I hope people understand, is that when government spends $500 billion, which is it's somewhere around there, more this year than what they took in revenue, they're still spending it. It's not there, but they're spending it. And so, of course, they go have the Federal Reserve fire up the printing presses to cover it and issue notes for it. And it's called the deficit. The deficit is what the government spends on a yearly basis more than what they take in, and of course that deficit adds to the national debt. And maybe you know the number. The national debt, just the interest as a part of our budget is something like 300 billion. It's like 15% of our budget, somewhere around there. It's like $300+ billion annually, just to pay the interest on the national debt.
Well, of course, there's never any intention of actually paying it off.
How can they?
Yeah.
It's you know, there's no money there to pay it. And but it does affect. But what people need to understand is that it's just another tool to plunder the citizens, because it affects not only you, but it will affect your children and your grandchildren and those in the future, because the fruit of their labor is siphoned off for the cause of government. And here's what's offensive to me, Rich, is that, and I see how it works after 6 years in the legislature, and I see the same thing working on the federal level, is that the politicians refuse to address the spending side of the equation because they use that money to essentially buy votes. And that's why they want more and more people, intentionally or unintentionally. This is what happens. Folks are becoming addicted or dependent on government. And it boils down to politicians simply buying their votes from the public treasury. That's why they're willing to pass tax cuts, but they're not willing to cut spending.
Right.
Because they don't want irate voters calling them up, complaining, and not voting for them because they didn't give them their share. They think they're entitled to this, of the public pie, I guess. And the other danger of that outrageous and unconstitutional spending is that it has prostituted not only the citizens to the federal government, but the states. The legislature of Montana has prostituted our state sovereignty to the federal government. Almost 50% of our state budget is federal dollars. They refuse, and by the way, the founders argued, the Federalists especially, argued for the ratification of the Constitution using the argument that the state legislatures would keep Congress in check. If Congress ever started to violate the Constitution or appropriate money that was unconstitutional, the states would step in and interpose. It was called the doctrine of interposition themselves between the Congress and the people. But they refuse to do that now because of the unfortunate act of the 16th Amendment, whether it was valid or not, and the federal government being able to directly tax the people. They can now use the money to blackmail the states. And the states have become so dependent on federal dollars that they have lost their sovereignty as states. And let me remind people that the Montana Constitution is very plain in Article 2, and I believe it's Section 2, that it says the state of Montana shall be governed as a free, independent, and sovereign state. Now, our legislators, when they acquiesce to these unconstitutional federal demands, whether it's mandating a DUI, lowering the, I think in the last session that was a federal mandate to lower the blood alcohol level, or they wouldn't get highway funding, or if they don't gather Social Security numbers on hunting and fishing license, we won't give you your money for your welfare programs or Medicaid or etc., which is what happened. Then the state is forfeiting its sovereignty, and I think that is a violation of the oath of those state legislators, personally. I think they are violating their oath to uphold the Constitution when they are forfeiting the sovereignty of the state, and they're violating the whole principle, even further, of federalism, because they are not holding the federal government accountable to the federal Constitution, but they're simply acquiescing to usurpations by the federal government.
I see.
And I think personally, Rich, that that's a big issue. I think as long as the states maintain dependence on the federal government and their budgets, then we have a real problem trying to regain our freedom. That's why the Constitution Party and many others, and I appreciate Alan Keyes and his battle along these lines, we advocate the abolition of the 16th Amendment and the income tax. And to go back to the original intent of the Constitution, where the revenue for the federal government is basically apportioned among the states according to population, and each state pays the federal government its share according to population. That way, it turns the tail doesn't wag the dog, and the states control the federal government rather than the federal government given the opportunity to blackmail the states.
I see. Now, one thing you talk about, we talk about sovereignty. I mean, that's what this show is, sovereign solutions. So, you just talked about the importance of, well, you've talked about the importance of America being a sovereign nation, not subjected to the United Nations or one world, New World Order or
Right.
whatever, the Illuminati or Naughty Loomies, and the states, they're being sovereign and not being just glorified counties of this federal government. Well, one thing that I talk about here, of course, is about individuals reclaiming their sovereignty, and I talk about that quite a bit. But you mentioned before we got started with the filming that you live off the grid. It's like your family, your household is a sovereign kingdom, independent of the state. Can you tell us about that?
Well, and I think part of self-government. Self-government is not this simple notion involved in democracy that we are a self-governing nation because we can vote for our leaders.
Mm-hmm.
It's much, much bigger than that in the way our founders understood it. And self-government...
It's kind of like, once we vote for our leaders, our job is done.
There, yeah.
Let them figure it out.
Yeah.
Let them uphold the Constitution. Let them take care of our neighbors.
Right, and that's a big mistake. And the principle of self-government, which I think, in my definition and philosophy of education, is what I incorporate, is the principle of self-government can be called also self-control, self-restraint, self-sufficiency. All of those things express the principle of self-government. In other words, a child is not capable of self-government. That's why God gives them parents. They can't feed themselves, they can't clothe themselves, etc. And the goal of raising a child is to train that child to be self-governing. Now, when we have, and we're actually doing just the opposite in so many ways. We're training people to dependency rather than self-sufficiency. Just look at, Rich, just as an example, what's happening. It's the two worldviews at battle. Did you see the recent ruling in Health and Human Services where they determined that obesity is a disease and that's now going to be covered under Medicare?
Yeah,
Well,
this
stems from the same evolutionary worldview that calls alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction, etc., disease. In other words, the assumption is that we're not, or smoking. That was the tobacco lawsuit, was the big thing over there, and the state sued as if, we're not responsible. We can't make up, if we buy the cigarettes, it was because they made us buy them,
Right.
Well, this is all contrary to the principle of self-government. And that's why my contention is that we're training citizens now through the schools and through these social programs, just the opposite. We're training them towards dependency rather than freedom.
As a matter of fact, as a product of the government indoctrination, we never learned how to be self-sufficient, and their idea of teaching self-sufficiency was teaching you how to fill out job application forms so you can work for somebody else, or how to do a good interview,
or how to fill out your welfare forms.
Right.
I remember vividly in consumer education classes in high school, the teacher spoke straightforward that welfare is a right, and this is how you fill the forms out, etc. And you go down the county and get this. And this is contrary to the principles of self-government.
Right. So can you tell us? I think the viewers would probably be interested to hear about how you live off the grid and.
Well, I'm fortunate, Rich, in many ways, because of the property where I live, and that's why I'm such a big advocate of private property, which is much more than real estate, by the way. James Madison said property, the most sacred of all property is our conscience. But anyway, I hope people remember that property in and of itself is much bigger than real estate. It involves the fruit of your labor, whether that's expressed in intellectual property or physical property. And anyway, I'm fortunate to have water resources on my property, and in fact, my living is raising fish. I raise West Slope cutthroat trout, and so I utilize the water for that. But also, I have lots of drops, so I use the water through a penstock to create pressure, and I have a Pelton wheel, and I produce my own electricity. And after my water goes through my fish ponds, it warms up. It's pretty cold spring water, and then I use that for my garden and my orchard. And my wife raises wonderful strawberries. This fish water really does good on strawberries. So my desire for you since I was young was to be self-sufficient and free. And so the whole principle of self-government, once I began to understand it as in the larger sense, was very attractive to me and very easy for me to pursue. And I think it's unfortunate that we've lost that concept across our country.
Well, as a matter of fact, when I talk about private property, there are certain people out there, statists, who think that private property is just, right-wing nut stuff, and you can't have a sound environment and property rights. Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, I think that's very misinformed, and it's that presupposition right there is a statement that you are willing to place yourself under the control of somebody else, and the fruit of your labors belongs to others as much as it belongs to you. And it's also, quite frankly, a rejection of individual responsibility. It's like you want to swim in the school of fish because that gives you security. Well, I disagree with that. If you look at Noah Webster's, and they've perverted a lot of our words, this is one of our problems. These modern dictionaries do not use the same definitions as the original word, Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, for instance. And I wish I had it here because it's a wonderful definition of property. He goes into the whole thing, how that the notion of property comes right out of the book of Genesis. And that God gave to man dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air, etc., etc. And these statists, these socialists, these collectivists, they now think that the fruit of my labor belongs to them, and the collective, the society, as much as it belongs to me. That's their notion. By the way, that is the premise of an income tax, a progressive graduated income tax. And if government assumes the authority to redistribute $1, then they assume, Alan Keyes talks about this, then they assume ownership of all of the fruit of your labor. It's just a matter of how much they're going to keep and how much they're going to let you keep and how much they're going to take. You see what I'm saying? So and I would recommend that anybody that wants to really understand in depth the principle of property, go get Noah Webster's original 1828 dictionary, look under property, and then find James Madison's essay on property. Because these people are stepping on a very slippery slope if they think that property is an outmoded idea, because what they're endorsing, if you understand property in the total sense, James Madison said in this essay that the most sacred of all property is your conscience. And I would ask those people, are they willing to forfeit their conscience to the collective? That's what they're doing. And let me make a point. I'll say this, hoping that people will understand. Many of them are willing to do that and have. And I suggest that they're doing it through such things as hate crime laws. These are nothing more than thought police on the part of the state saying that this crime is politically correct, this crime is politically incorrect, so we're going to punish you more because that's a hate crime.
Right.
And it's just as, murder is murder. And in fact, let me make the point. All crimes are hate crimes. individuals create or commit crimes because they hate first. And so those folks that are saying that we're going to distinguish between, well, it's not so bad if a white man kills a white man, but if a white man kills a black man, that's worse, and that's a hate crime, and we're going to, and the Supreme Court, as you know, Rich, has ruled that that can be called a hate crime and additional punishment is merited. Well, I think they're both capital crimes, so then the person for premeditated murder should be executed. But you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
My point here, though?
Absolutely.
We have actually stepped that far to where we have given our conscience over to the collective with these hate crime laws. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but I see it that way,
Well,
and that's a dangerous step.
Yeah, that's quite a... I've never heard it put that way. You've taught me something.
And I adamantly oppose these so-called hate crime laws. A crime is a crime, and they're all hate crimes.
Right.
A person steals from you because he hates that you have something that he doesn't. He kills you because he has hate in his heart. He commits adultery with your wife because he hates that you have her, etc. You follow my point.
Right. Well, now, getting back to the private property, see, there are people who feel that if people are allowed to have their own property, then it'll just ruin the environment.
Yeah.
So, how would you... I mean, we don't want to ruin the environment, do we?
In the name of let me just give you a quote, and I don't remember who said this. In the name of everybody owning it, nobody owns it. And therefore, nobody cares for it. The person, and I say this as a property owner, and I've seen it. This is another one of the fallacies that the collectivists and the socialists have foisted on us, and we let them get away with it. The person that owns the property, that has the opportunity, and I'm talking real estate here because property entails much more than real estate. But the real estate as an example because we're addressing the environment. The person that owns it and has the opportunity to improve it and to make it productive and to pass it on to his children and his grandchildren has a vested interest in maintaining the integrity of that property. When the collective owns it, they don't. Who has the opportunity to do any with it? And that's a fallacy anyway. This public ownership property, besides being unconstitutional as far as the federal government's concerned, Rich.
Yeah.
Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 specifies what the federal government can own property for in the states. And national forests and national parks are not in there.
They're not?
It should be Glacier State Park. It should be the Grand Canyon State Park. It shouldn't be national parks. The federal government controls these the Forest Service shouldn't exist. That should be controlled and owned by the states. It's a violation of the Constitution. But let me say this, we keep calling it public land, and the statists and socialists keep advocating, this is your land, and we want you to take care of it, etc., etc. No, it's not public land, it's government land. And you see that now because what's happening? They're restricting your access unless you have so-called authority, and then if they even let you go on in most cases, and we see this even on state land, you have to pay a fee. If you actually have collective ownership, then you should, in the true sense of property, you would be able to utilize your share. But you were having to pay the government. So I think we need to, personally, I think we need to confront this notion that it's public land and we all get to do this and that. And in any instances where it legitimately is public land, it should be controlled by the state, not the federal government. And private property, getting back to your question, the private owners have more of a vested interest in maintaining the environmental integrity of that property than the collective does together. So I think it's a fallacy that individual ownership necessarily results in violation of the environment.